the projects that the Western Great Lakes Bird and Bat Observatory is starting that are kind of expansions of other things that we've done in the past. But basically the theme throughout both projects is trying to create a better world for both people, but also for birds, and how we can do this in a way that kind of lifts us all up. And Carl suggested that I give you a little bit about my background. So I never know where to start with things like this. So when I asked my family on one of these video calls on where to start, of course, my parents tell me it all goes back to me being a kid chasing ducks in Madison. And so I was born in Madison, and the kind of through line of my life has been chasing birds and the Great Lakes. And they joke around that they should have known what I was going to become starting then. But most of my childhood was growing up in the Saginaw Bay area of Michigan, where I worked for DNR both as a volunteer and then later as a staff person, doing interpretation, but also was studying birds and the effect of changing lake levels on habitat there. So I got to start learning about kind of the interplay between science and education that also was a theme in my life. I thought, though, that I wanted to get the heck out of the Midwest. I was really wrong about that, but I thought at 18 that was really what I wanted to do. So I went to Lewis and Clark College for my undergrad. And when I was there, I learned that birds were more than a hobby, that they could actually be a career. And I had the chance to do some really cool research at bigger universities, at the University of Virginia and at College of William and Mary, that just really taught me more about birds and about kind of the cool things that we can learn from them. But it took me a little while to figure out exactly where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do with this. And so I took a little bit of time off between undergrad and grad school and worked for a few NGOs and for Fish and Wildlife Service. So worked at Bruce Peninsula in Canada, Fish and Wildlife Service in Arizona, and then what's now Point Blue, what was at the time Point Reyes, out on the Farallon Islands in California. And what all of this kind of taught me was about how birds connect us, and about how you can study birds, and how different people have these kind of opinions of birds, but they still unite us in that kind of visceral way. And it's one of those kind of crazy things to go from working with Frenchmen in Canada to hunters in like really rural Arizona, and still realizing that these same birds connect all of us, and everyone I was interacting with was really passionate about them, even if it was in different ways. But I went to grad school at University of California, Davis, where I worked with some really awesome people, a lot of them shown here, where I studied why birds are darker in areas of higher humidity, which is the pattern called Gloger's rule. But I also learned a ton about teaching and experimental design, and how all these things play together, and how conservation and research can kind of complement each other. But one other thing I realized when I was doing research across the country was that I miss the Midwest and I miss the Great Lakes. And as much as I loved research, I wanted to get back there. And so I took a job at Region 5 EPA, which is the region that covers the Great Lakes. And so I worked for 3 years at EPA, reviewing water quality standards, and mostly in Wisconsin. But also it meant that I got to learn about kind of the water quality issues that affect this area, especially Southeast Wisconsin. And in doing so, I fell in love with it. So basically half the year I was in a cubicle in your classic government building, and the other half the year or about 38th the year, I was hanging off the front of a boat like this, usually in tribal waters in northern Wisconsin and Minnesota, helping measure water quality. And while it was a really cool opportunity to learn about our government, When the position opened up here, I thought, why not apply to it? I thought I had a really low chance of getting it, but it was just kind of this opportunity that you can't, you got to try, because it just brought me back to even closer to the lakes and this area that I really fell in love with while I was at EPA. So my husband and I moved up here at the end of last year, and yeah, and we've been really enjoying living in Wisconsin and experiencing all of that. So that's kind of, it feels like a really long-winded way, but try and give you guys some idea of where I come from and who I am and why I think about research the way I do. And it probably gives you hopefully some idea of why we're picking the programs we are to keep moving forward with. So first, I'm going to talk about our neighborhood habitat improvement project, which is kind of a way for people to make an impact in their neighborhoods for birds. So as I'm sure you're all familiar with the 3 billion bird study, we're losing a lot of our common species. And while this is really disheartening in a lot of ways, it also opens the opportunity to talk about birds with different people who may not be as passionate about bird watching or conservation, but still have these personal connections to birds in their backyards and in places that they see every day. And I think that's an opportunity for us to try to make inroads to improve our world for birds. And in doing so, hopefully improve our world for people too. And that's one thing that I'm really excited about, is trying to create programs that bring us all together for the benefit of birds and for people. And that kind of observation is what's driving this project, to try to help empower people to make decisions in their lives that can help reverse the declines that we're seeing in the world around us. And to this end, I'll be talking today about how the project that we're starting is hoping to reverse some of these declines and kind of combat urbanization and habitat degradation that are driving some of the losses in this area. And doing so, but using a behavior change campaign coupled with scientific research so that we can better understand why we're losing birds and what we can do about it on the ground to make a difference. And then I'll be talking a little bit about us as an organization before switching to the other project that I'll be talking about today, which is Motus. So I'm sure you're all aware of a lot of the bird declines. And what may be a little less familiar is we're also undergoing worldwide insect declines that are well documented both across the world, but also in North America. And this is thought to be linked to some of the bird declines we're seeing. While there are many causes for declines in birds, one of the contributing factors is that birds depend on insects, both insectivores, but also a lot of even our seed-eating birds eat a lot of insects, especially when they breed. So it's really important to have this healthy insect base for birds throughout their life cycle. And there are many reasons for these declines, but most of the time, most scientists believe that habitat loss and degradation are the drivers of both of them. So both the loss of insects and the loss of birds. And while this is different in different areas, in this region, one of the largest drivers is urbanization and how we go about doing it. So typically, as you're all familiar, urbanization involves high density residences and lots of impervious surface and invasive species and grass lawns. And that change can lead to these corresponding changes for birds, where it can often result in reduction in food, because a lot of non-native species, including grass, especially grass, because it's kind of a monoculture, doesn't support the full diversity of insects, because through evolutionary history, insects and plants have evolved together, so that insects eat the plants that live in the same area. Except when you put non-native species in where they've never coexisted with insects before, a lot of times they can't support those insects, and then that reduces the amount of food available for birds and other wildlife. And then, as is whenever you think about urbanization, one of the biggest changes is changes in habitat structure. So going from forests or grasslands to kind of normal suburbs. And increase in predation. So changing from native predators to a lot of times cats, but also changes in number of native predators. So things like raccoons and even squirrels are often nest predators. So these species that are really good at coexisting with us often eat birds. So all of these things together create these interactive effects that are often negative for birds in urban areas. And as you're probably all familiar, I'm guessing a lot of you are living in one of these counties. Southeast Wisconsin is undergoing relatively rapid urbanization, and this is just continued. And especially in Waukesha and Ozaukee counties, this is just continued for another decade. So I'm up in Port Washington, and that's where the observatory is. And if you could have one more decade on here, you'd see even more little patches of color showing up, both north and south of Port Washington, Cedarburg, Grafton. And this is a challenge for birds, but it's also an opportunity of trying to work with homeowners to create habitats that are meaningful for birds. So going from kind of your classic suburbs like this with lots of yard space and lots of grass that often requires more pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers in order to maintain this healthy, uniform color, and work with communities to try to build more diverse habitats. And this is challenging. It's kind of probably intuitive why this isn't really bird friendly, but just to put a point on it is the chemical inputs are often ends up in runoff that can pollute rivers, and that can be challenging for the base of a lot of food webs, start with aquatic insects. And also these non-native species of plants just don't host as many insects, which are really critical for a lot of our breeding birds. But it doesn't have to always be this way. So some people have already, in this area, have already made choices to make their yards more wildlife friendly, planting more native species, having more diverse habitat structure, and in doing so, essentially create habitats for insects, and then in doing so, create a habitat for birds. And so this kind of shows that there's an opportunity for change, and it can start small. And small changes can still have a big difference for insects and correspondingly for birds. So there's a growing recognition that this is really important for birds. This is still a pretty active area of research, but in a few studies that have looked at it, they've found that birds that have territories in more in urban areas that have more native plants fledge more young. So for example, Narango, Talmy, and Mara found that with Carolina chickadees, that they'll nest in really urban areas, and much like our blackcaps do here, and they'll still nest in areas that have a lot of grass, that have, as long as there's still trees around, that have a lot of non-native species. But what they're finding is that they don't fledge as many young. So it's harder for them to raise young and sustain their populations versus pairs that were nesting in native species, plant species dominated areas. They fledged more young and were sustainable populations. So it gives a hint at what the insect literature has already found, that native species are really important for insects, and it makes sense that these pieces fit together like this, but this is still a really active area of research. And to kind of forward the research and forward on the ground conservation in this region, we're studying two different related processes. One is studying the effects of native plants on birds. So this is still, there have only been a couple of studies that really got at this, and none of them in the Midwest, or in this part of the Midwest at least. And the second is looking at how we can change people's behaviors for how you actually go about changing things. But this still leaves open the question of how do you actually affect change? Sorry, my husband just let my dog in, if you can hear that. And so what we're trying to do with this program is try to figure out how do you actually get people to change their behaviors and do so in a sustainable long-term way. And we're doing that using community-based social marketing, which is the use of marketing principles and techniques to influence a target audience to voluntarily accept, reject, modify, or abandon a behavior for the benefit of a target audience or society as a whole. So that's kind of a mouthful, but basically it comes down to using all of those annoying things that you see in commercials for the good of people. So how do you take all of those annoying marketing ideas and use them to make society better? And we're doing this by implementing kind of this method right now of taking the behavior of native plantings, analyzing the barriers and benefits to members of the Port Washington community, and then developing a strategy based on those individual barriers and benefits, and then pilot testing this and implementing in the future. But right now we're firmly in the barriers and benefits and developing a strategy phase. And this kind of complements the scientific study that we're doing of looking at the relationship between native plants and avian habitat use and breeding success in Southeast Wisconsin based on current distribution of plants in urban suburban areas. So basically what we're trying to show here is, does Wisconsin work the same way DC works? So where scientists found that if you had more native plants, you have better nesting success of birds. So basically seeing if you still have this positive relationship between the two in Wisconsin. And then what's different about the study is basically trying to use outreach and behavior change campaigns targeting native plantings as experimental treatment to test how outreach programs can affect change in bird outcomes. That's also a mouthful, but basically what this means is, can we educate through education and outreach, move people along this line so that you would, when you plant more native plants, do you see a corresponding effect in birds, what you would predict based on these relationships? And this, what kind of underlying this whole idea is island biogeography theory, which sounds a little far afield, especially when you think about it in terms of most of this was figured out in the Caribbean and Indonesia, but I promise it does all connect back to this. But this is basically a few ideas that, or principles that biologists have found about islands that can also help us understand conservation. So the idea is, what they were originally studying are actual islands. So these islands in the middle of the ocean. But what scientists have realized with conservation is that these islands can also be patches of habitat in a sea of inhospitable area. So say a really urbanized, really high impervious surface area. So you have, say, a park or a really good habitat of neighborhoods in the sea of city. So you can apply those same principles that they've found out with islands to conservation and kind of figure out what our ideal would be. And so what they found was if islands were closer
to another island, it was easier for organisms to get there, especially if they're not very good at dispersing, like a lot of our insects aren't. But that kind of makes sense. The closer you are, the easier it is to get to it. The bigger the patch or the island, the more organisms colonize it. So basically, it's a bigger target to hit. It means more will get there. And possibly the most important for conservation is bigger patches can sustain more diversity and more individuals. So this means that you can sustain larger populations with larger patches. So the take-home message from all of this is saying you want patches that are close together and as big as you can get. But unfortunately, a lot of our parks are kind of the size they are. So it's not always that easy to just get more park. So instead, you have to think about how can we work with what we have to get the most good out of them. And what we're trying to do with this project is work with parks we already have, and then with neighborhoods around them to essentially create bigger islands through native plantings. So for example, we're working in Sauk Creek Nature Preserve, pictured here, and working with the community around it to try to plant more native plants. So essentially this patch, this island, can become a bigger island by having neighborhoods around it that are more bird and insect friendly. And the other thing that's kind of cool about working in this way is it also, by working in neighborhoods, you can have groupings of people, which are important for a few different reasons. But a lot of the programs targeting native plantings right now are kind of the shotgun spread, where you have whoever is interested changes their behavior, but there's no kind of pattern to it. So while this is really good and this does help, if based on island biogeography theory, what you'd want is a bunch of people to be together. So that means that you could hold more bird territories, especially when some birds have pretty large territories. So 1 yard just wouldn't be enough. So by having larger patches together, you can support more different species and kind of apply that kind of island biogeography theory to it. The other thing that I find really fascinating about this is that there's also a bunch of research on how people decide what to plant in their neighborhoods. And the biggest predictor of what people plant is what everybody else plants around them. So it means that if you can change people's behaviors in groups, that should be long-term sustainable. And so it has both kind of social benefits of creating norms about how you plant species or plant plants, but also has these bird benefits at the same time. And the other thing we're doing is working along streams. And this is important because it means that you can create larger buffers to those streams. So one thing we know about water quality is that the more buffer you have between a source and the water body, those buffers can absorb a lot of nutrients. So it means less of those nutrients get into the stream. So things like nitrogen and phosphorus that a lot of times people put on their lawns to keep them green, it often is too much, so it ends up in the streams. That can cause algae blooms or a lot of negative things for insects. And the other thing that's important is that a lot of these insects that live in these water bodies are emergent. So they start out their lives as aquatic insects and then metamorphosize into all of the good mayflies and dragonflies and lots of different flies that we see around in the world that a lot of our insectivores really love to eat and we know are really important for raising young. So we want water bodies that are healthy and can support good emergent insect populations. And we can do that by creating larger buffers. And the other thing that's kind of cool about this is native plants need less. chemicals. So you're both buffering what is put on the landscape, but also just requiring less input all at the same time. And then the context of this scientifically is that it links recognized need in the, but to link environmental ed with scientific research. So trying to link what we know about how birds react to urbanization with actually changing behavior. And then it addresses some of our gaps of understanding, especially when it comes to scale. So those kind of grouping effects, we hypothesize it should work like this because that's how, that's what we know from island biogeography theory and a lot of conservation work. But we still need to figure out how this works with people and neighborhoods and actually getting it to work on the ground. And then what I think is possibly the most powerful is it supports on the ground conservation. So it's things that we can all do in our lives to make things better for birds and I would argue for people. So I'm not going to go into super detail, but basically this is a 3-phase process where we started the community-based social marketing this year. Next year, we're going to start the biological data collection, both for birds and for plants. And then we're going to monitor how these changes actually take root on the landscape once these have been established. And that takes a few years because we have to work with people and with plants. And we'll be measuring nesting success using NestWest protocols are kind of the primary measure that we'll be looking at. But we'll also be looking at diversity of species, especially since we know there are species that use neighborhoods that are migratory and don't nest in this region. So it's important to look at both. And then we'll also be looking at plant coverage and diversity using homeowner surveys and consultation. So so switching gears from the science and back to the social science. What we know for behavior change is you want locations where you can actually make a difference. So that's areas that not everybody's already doing the behavior. If everybody's doing it, there's no point in convincing people to change. And then the other thing that you want to find are locations where people are motivated to change. And so we asked people in Port Washington as part of a free milkweed program to try to see what people were already doing in their yards. And we surveyed 2 areas in Port Washington. The first one here, if you're familiar with Port Washington, here's the harbor, here's Upper Lake Park. And the first target area, the park area is kind of along the urban trail here and then Birchwood Hills. And then the area around it is outlined in yellow is the neighborhood that we surveyed. And here's some pictures of Birchwood Hills, which is a pretty cool place for being in the middle of the neighborhood. The second one is along Saw Creek in kind of just west of the other neighborhood. And you can see here Saw Creek Preserve is in the middle. The high school is here if you're familiar with that, and then the neighborhood around it. And these have kind of 2 different ages, which is kind of interesting to look at the difference both in terms of what people are planting, but also how much diversity is in the 2. There's a pretty new subdivision with some higher density housing like apartments and townhouses here versus older homes here. And then this allowed us to ask questions about what people were already doing in their yards and how they felt about native plantings in general. And so what we were looking for are neighborhoods where not everybody's already planting native plants and have perfect habitat already. And not surprisingly, not everybody's planting all native plants, and a lot of people have lawns, which is not surprising driving around Port Washington. That's a lot of what's here. So here you can see number of respondents on the y-axis with percentage of yard. on the x-axis, and we asked them what percentage of your yard is covered by grass. And here you can see kind of expected, most people, most of their yard is grass. And then similarly, what percentage of your yard that's not covered with grass is covered by native plants? Not a lot of native plants. So it means, while this is kind of depressing for birds, it means that we have a real opportunity to make a difference, that we can help people change, and that there's an opportunity here. And the other good thing from selecting this location as a good place to work, people are really interested in both gardening with native plants. So you can see here, we asked them, how interested are you in a bunch of different things? 2 of them were gardening with native plants and participating in a program to improve your yard for birds and pollinators. And in both cases, the most common answer was very interested. So people, while they're not doing it, are interested and motivated to create habitat and garden with native plants. But that leaves up the question, why aren't people doing it? If they're interested, but they're not, where are things breaking down here? So we asked them also about barriers to different garden-related behaviors. And one of them is, what prevents you from planting more native plants in your yard? And what we found is, don't know how to care for it is the most common answer. So people don't know how to care for native plants. And then, and within there were other ones that were kind of more specific knowledge related things, like don't know what won't be eaten by deer. So things like that. But it showed, like, the data really clearly showed that a lot of people just didn't know how to do this. They wanted to, but don't know how. And which is kind of a cool opportunity for us as a scientific and outreach organization. That's something we can really do something about. And then similarly, what keeps people from naturalizing part of their yards is, again, the most common answer was they don't know how to care for it, which I find really especially interesting, is that this is different than other studies who have asked these questions. A lot of times people in other studies have said things like, it looks messy is a more common answer, or the city won't allow it, which at least people in Port Washington know that that is not the problem, which is good. But it means that this is the barrier that people most commonly have, is something that we can address. But that's kind of the idea of community-based social marketing, is to look at what barriers people are experiencing in their lives and try to build a program that addresses the most common ones. So we're doing that right now. So this is kind of a little bit behind the scenes, giving you an idea of what we're thinking about these days in terms of program development. So we're developing these reinforcing programs to both address the knowledge gaps, but also enhance motivation. So we know that one of the largest barriers is people just don't know how to care for this, or don't know where to get them. A lot of don't know how to do things related to naturalizing and native plants. But in order to keep people motivated, we kind of need to reinforce both how to do it, but also keep people motivated and keep people engaged, so that they continually follow up and stay participating in the program. And so this means a combination of kind of information-based programs, so workshops, but also a consultation program where we can work with people to get commitments and provide direct feedback to address their individual concerns of what they're seeing in their yards and specifically. And then working with social norms to make the behavior visible, because that's the other thing that came out of the surveys, is that not everybody knows what native plants look like. So translating what is kind of a invisible behavior, if you don't know what you're looking at, into a visible one. So how, by creating models of native plantings and designing signs and messaging related to native plants, we hope to make these behaviors more visible for people. And in the future, we want to expand this throughout the region so we can better understand how kind of this gradient of urbanization is affecting birds and how we can make a difference along the entire urban gradient while building diverse connections and partnerships. So one of the cool things about doing this in Port Washington is that we're here and we're part of the community here. But by expanding into other regions of Wisconsin, it allows us to build partnerships and build inroads into communities where other organizations have meaningful roots like we do here. And then in doing that, expanding the data collection and impact for birds, which as a scientist is super exciting on the data standpoint. And as a conservationist and just somebody who loves birds, expanding the impact is where it's all at. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make things better for birds and people. And for us at the observatory, this is kind of a perfect fit. We've already done a lot of pollinator and native plant work, mainly for monarchs, but also for other pollinators. And small organizations like ours that are in a small community, especially in a small community, are in a really good position to change behavior. There's a lot of research showing that behavior change campaigns are much more well received coming from small organizations that are in the community rather than especially governmental agencies that are not in the community. There's often a lot of resistance to that. And both Observatory and in my history have a lot of experience with urban ornithology. So this all just kind of, all the pieces are there for us to be in a good fit. And I think probably the most important is that it meets the needs of the region. It's something that Southeast Wisconsin is, and especially Ozaukee County really is expanding urbanization. It's really on the front line. So how do we, as a bird observatory, help that and make that the best it can be? And I've been largely focusing on the impact on birds and other wildlife, but I would like to briefly touch on kind of why this is a good thing for other reasons as well. I mentioned water quality, but by planting more native plants and creating these buffers along streams, you can really impact water quality. I worked in water quality standards in EPA, and that's one of the things that is one of the most important things for reducing nutrient runoff, which is one of the most common problems in Wisconsin, is creating larger buffers, and especially buffers that don't need chemical inputs. So these kind of programs really can make a difference for aquatic organisms as well as birds. And then on this human side of things, having green spaces has a lot of really good psychological effects that I'm sure you're all very aware of getting out, seeing birds, being in green spaces, has all of these physiological and psychological benefits. Things like reducing stress level, even reducing blood pressure, healing faster from injuries. All of these things are linked to being in green spaces, except you have to be out in green spaces frequently. And how is it easier than to just go out in your backyard if you're to get in a green space? And it means by creating this habitat for birds, you're still creating habitats for people so that they can get those benefits too. And I think as a scientist, I'm of course excited that this is a way to get more people connected to science, to get science out of the ivory tower and into people's backyards where people can relate to it. And I think that's really important, that we create programs that people can meaningfully interact with and engage with, because science is really about asking questions and making observations, and that's something that everyone can do. So it's just really exciting to build programs that can really engage people like that. So that's kind of wrapping up the native habitat program. And then I'll be switching, spending a little less time talking about Motus and STEM education. So in case you haven't heard about Motus before, this is our other big project, and we've been doing some stuff with it already. And so you may have heard about this before. So I'm going to keep this relatively brief, but Motus is the Motus Wildlife Tracking System, which is an international collaborative research network that uses coordinated automated radio telemetry array to track the movement of small flying animals. Again, a mouthful, but basically what it means is if a bird with a little tag like this one flies near what looks like an overgrown TV antenna, it emits a radio signal to the tower, which then logs that this bird was within range of it. And then scientists know that this bird was there, and we can use that to track movements of organisms that were just impossible before. So it's really the only technology that's feasible to track a lot of the really small organisms. So things like passerines, but even things smaller than that. People have put Motus transmitters on monarchs and really small organisms too. So that's kind of the innovation that Motus is that it can track things that were formerly not feasible because other types of transponders are just too heavy to put on a little bird. And these towers can look really different in different areas. So everything from solar arrays in the tundra to lighthouses to attached to buildings, which is most of the ones that we've put up are attached to buildings like this one. And as you can see here, Motus towers are across the world, but you can also tell that they're really densely packed in eastern United States. And what we're trying to do is expand that westward. So try to expand the Motus network into the Western Great Lakes and the Western Midwest. And what I think is really cool about this Motus in general is that it's just an amazing technology and amazing partnership between tons of really great organizations that are able to answer questions that just wouldn't be possible otherwise. So right now it's on 4 continents in 31 countries, almost 900 receivers. It's probably actually over 900 now, especially since I know 2 went up in Wisconsin. Then over 200 species tags, almost 23,000 animals tagged for over 300 projects, almost 800 partners, and has resulted in over 100 publications. And it's not important really to think about or to memorize these numbers or know these numbers, but the important thing to see in the numbers is that this is a massive collaboration that allows us to address questions that any individual organization would have no chance, no matter how big it was, of answering them alone. So by working together, we can answer these giant, cool, amazing migration questions about how these birds move that just really isn't feasible any other way. So to zoom in a little bit in Wisconsin, so this is a little dark, but we work with organizations in basically the southern half or 2/3 of Wisconsin, but in northern Wisconsin, the University of Minnesota Duluth just put up a fair amount of towers last year. And then there are a couple others, one at the Carpenter St. Croix Valley Nature Center, right on the Minnesota border. And then we work with these 4 organizations and preserves to help them download data and work with those towers. And then Waukee Zoo just put up their tower. It's not quite functional yet, but it's very close. And then Madison Audubon Society just put up their tower last week or the week before. And that is functional. So that it's really exciting that it's expanding pretty much as we speak. Even if there have been a few delays with COVID. And to give you a sense of what the data these are already bringing in look like, this is last fall's data. So because there aren't a lot of towers in Wisconsin, there aren't a lot of people tagging birds, but we're still getting data from people tagging birds in far off places. So a lot of the birds that were intercepted by the towers that we help with actually came from British Columbia. So you can see there was a project looking at hybridization of 2 subspecies of Swainson's thrushes, and that's why they tagged a bunch of these birds here, and then a bunch of them were intercepted in southeast and southern Wisconsin. But then there were a few others that were tagged for other reasons, mainly along the coast. So that gives you a sense of what the birds are coming from and being intercepted by Motus right now. But the ultimate goal is to put up more towers and have kind of this network, these lines of towers that allow us to basically be sure that if a bird flies through Wisconsin, it will be intercepted by towers. So right now we're slowly working towards this goal, and have mainly filled in kind of this portion down here. But this is ultimately what we're trying to aim for. And this will be really attractive to researchers because it means that if you tag a bird around here, you have a really good chance of it being intercepted by a tower. And to try to help this expansion and kind of help Motus do the most good it can, we're exploring partnerships with eSTEM organizations. And eSTEM is environmental education or environmental science, science, technology, engineering, and math. So a lot of, you've probably heard of STEM. It's a really big push in education lately. And a lot of environmental ed organizations are kind of making logical connections between environmental science and traditional STEM. And I think, and we're exploring these partnerships because there's a real opportunity to link up Motus with environmental education like this. And in forming these partnerships, it really capitalizes on the opportunity of Motus and these locations together. And by allowing students to experience cutting edge technology, bridging multiple STEM topics, so things like coding and biology and telemetry and a lot of different, even everything from physics to, there's just so many different STEM topics that are kind of combined into Motus that there's just so many opportunities to teach students about. But they're still much more approachable because it's through birds. And as I'm sure you guys all know, birds are just so awesome and engaging in ways that a lot of times coding especially is not. And there's a lot of environmental ed related organizations in Wisconsin, over 700. And this gives us an opportunity to build that network that I referred to, because they just have so much geographic coverage, and it really is kind of a cool opportunity of partnering these two together. And for me, the most exciting part of this is it expands the benefits of Motus. As awesome as Motus is for research, which it totally is, we're finding out really awesome things about birds, it expands the benefits even farther. And it can help students understand STEM in a way that it's often difficult. So right now we're working through the process of kind of establishing an eSTEM partnership with eSTEM partners, where we'll be working together to put up towers, apply for grants, and then expand them throughout the state. So that's kind of where we're going with Motus, but just in case, I'm guessing some of you might have heard about some of the towers that are already in the area. So I was just gonna give you also a quick update about what else has been happening. So the Forest Beach Migratory Preserve Tower, which, sorry, it got formatted weird. something about that. Since if you may or may not be aware, the Forest Beach Migratory Preserve clubhouse lost power when we entered. Anyway, it lost power and is going to be decommissioned soon. So we had to move the tower from the clubhouse to another facility nearby and a private landowner. And so basically just moving about 1.5 miles down the coast. But it has since has such a large range, it's not that different from a bird's or Motus perspective. And then, as I mentioned, new towers. One just went up in the Milwaukee Zoo, so the computer isn't quite functional yet, but the tower is up and will be online soon. And then Madison Audubon Society just came online. And to kind of wrap up, I just wanted to kind of talk about really briefly what I think these two projects have in common. And it's really what I see my vision for the observatory is trying to do the best we can for birds, but also for people and communities of this region. So both of what I think unites both of these projects is that they try to do the most good for birds, for people, and the communities that they're in. And that's kind of what we're aiming for. And with that, I will take anybody's questions about any of this stuff. Also, here's my contact information if you ever want to get in contact with me about anything.
So if you want to unshare your screen so everybody can see everyone else, and then we'll have everybody that wants to ask a question unmute themselves and go ahead and ask questions. So you might have to wait for others to speak first, though. So go ahead. What do you want to know from Jen about the project she's been working on?
Let me just jump in here for a minute while people are unmuting themselves. And please feel free to go ahead and unmute so you can jump in here with any questions or comments or anything like that. I happened to sit in on another Zoom, actually it was a GoToMeeting meeting that Jen held with a potential funder for some of this work earlier this afternoon. And I said on that call, something I will share with you all here today. Dr. Phillips-Vanderberg is really taking the observatory up a notch. We've had some great leadership in the past from Noel and from Bill, but these two projects, the enlargement of the Motus concept and the launch of this habitat project reflect a new sophistication in what the observatory is attempting, combining science and public outreach and education in a very her last slide, the ability to connect birds and people and the region that we're in. I mean, we have moved the observatory into Port Washington. We're anchored in a community, and I think the chance that we have to make an impact on a bigger scale, on a small scale in some ways, but with a very big concept that is proving very exciting to people. And I hope that all of you will pay attention. If you're not already on the observatory's mailing list, let me put in a plug. Please send me an email, and I will be glad to. You all get my email, so you all got my email address. But either send me or Jen an email, and we'll be glad to add you to our 6 times a year email newsletter. So not a lot of traffic clogging up your mailbox, but some really good information that will keep you up to date on some of what we're doing. So anyway, I'll throw that open to anybody else with any comments or questions.
So I'll ask a question is, how do you go about getting a tower on your property? Is that there some criteria that you have to meet? Do you have to be in that direct line that goes across the state or whatever?
So it really depends on how it's being funded. So we won't say no to anybody who wants to fund a tower. So if you, and they usually cost between 5 and 10 grand, depending on where it's being attached to. But if we're fundraising for it, we're trying to emphasize strategic location. So kind of along those lines, but it doesn't have to be perfectly on those lines. So if there are locations that especially have internet, power, and a relatively decent level of safety for it, I would be totally willing to talk about it, especially with mission consistent organizations. Because one of the things we're really trying to do is not have to move them a lot. So we want these locations to be long-term stable and pretty safe, so vandals or anybody won't come in and mess with them.
I think, Mary, to follow up on your question, River Edge, not only from the nature center point of view, but the school, I mean, it's sort of a perfect potential partner to do that. You've got all of the, you're able to translate this into the eSTEM approach that we're trying to do. You've got a good facility with all of the requisite power and internet, and the main building sits out in pretty much out in the open, where you'd have good reception for that tower. Security would be good. That's sort of the kind of partners that we're looking at. We're starting talks with a couple of other potential partners. But again, you know, the organization that has some funding behind it that can afford to put up the tower, and then and see it as an investment where you could interact with a whole bunches of things. I could even see, if River Edge decided to do that, I could even see the Bird Club throwing in some money to help support it.
Yep.
Wow. Well, that is great to hear, and I'm sure the charter school and our homeschool students will, would really be interested in it, and be a great way to get them involved in a STEM project that's very authentic.
Yeah.
And that's one of the cool things about Motus. I really didn't mention this, but part of the collaboration is that everybody has to share their data. So as part of the network, you essentially agree to share your data with everybody. But what is really cool about that from a teaching perspective, it means that you have this giant data set to play with, that you can ask these different questions about birds that started out in Panama or birds that started out in the Arctic. And you can ask these different questions because you have what everybody in all of the stations together, they're all the data. So I think that's just a really cool, both scientifically, but also from an education standpoint, you can kind of separate it into looking at different questions, and students can ask their own questions too from it, because it's all public access.
Jen?
Excellent.
Are you in communication with the Urban Ecology Center in Milwaukee? That would be a perfect location.
Yes, we are talking. Yes, so I am talking with them, both about Motus, but also about kind of other opportunities. And we are exploring if there is a good location there, mainly because it's a little close, like, without going into tons of detail, you basically need to make sure that they're tall enough and to not get interference from other buildings, but also it's a little close to the Milwaukee County Zoo for on a Motus level, because they have like 10-mile range. So you kind of, ideally you want them separated, but we are talking about
Right, there's the Milwaukee River Flyway there, and they have a tower, so it would be really workable. Also, some of us tonight or live at Cedar Community over on Big Cedar Lake, 250 plus acres. That's kind of permanent with a lot of opportunities, I think, not just for that project, but for some of the other projects you're talking about. We have way too much grass, for example. And a lot of us are looking for ways to change that into native plants.
Yeah,
It's
feel
really
free
good.
to reach out.
When you're allowed to visit, you can come over and visit sometime.
Yes, definitely. We're going to be having, if you sign up for any of the like newsletter or anything like that, we'll be having workshops next year about how to actually do some of this. And while we're targeting Port Washington, everybody's invited, especially for a lot of it will be online for a while. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, everyone who's interested is welcome.
Yeah, I want to chime in and let folks know that I've talked to you, I think, before, Jen, briefly last fall, that I'm with the Friends of the Cedarburg Bog. And as you know, that's a huge area, not so far away from where you are. And the Friends of the Cedarburg Bog would definitely be interested in a Motus installation if it makes sense given location. And I think that I might prevail upon my board of directors to float the money to put one up. But my question is that once it's up, what kind of resources are required to keep it operational, to gather the data and so forth? Because that on the long range might be more of a challenge for us than initial cash outlay.
So it really depends on how involved you want to be. So for most of the organizations that we work with, we handle the data part of it. So there's a really awesome volunteer we have who goes out and actually downloads the data 2 or 3 times a year. So basically what's required is access for a volunteer or me to go out and download the data.
Yeah.
Then it has to have some connection to internet. It must have a connection to power, but internet is definitely preferred.
Power and internet are on location.
Yeah, I mean, so some of the locations we have internet, others don't. We prefer internet just because it means that if something happens, we know, versus if, for example, somebody accidentally turned off a light switch that they did not realize was connected to the power to the Motus station at one location. So if it's hooked up to the internet, then we know to go out there and be like, what just happened? You lost power. Versus otherwise we can't find that out until we go to download the data. So that's kind of the reason internet's really helpful. But from like a staffing perspective, it really is just somebody to let us in and power. It's pretty low key.
We'll give you the password.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's usually not a big deal. It's just how controlled your site is.
Right, and as I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Cedarburg Bog and the Friends, but we also, we're there in partnership with the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and run programs for students. So there's a connection there for folks, and there's already bird research going on there at the bog, at the field station, and in the bog.
I would think
that'd be
Dr.
awesome.
I would think Dr. Meyer would be very interested in that, Jim. That'd be
Yes, I've spoken with
the Friends and the field station to partner on.
I've spoken with her, and she is interested. And in fact, right now is a really nice time to, given the situation with the COVID and also with budget cuts and so forth, is a nice time to have a project that has some appeal, you know, for the field station as well as for the Friends.
Cool.
Yeah, and I didn't talk about this, but there are multiple kinds of antenna that you can put out there, and I can imagine for a place like Cedarburg Bog, there are antennas that are better at tracking birds right around the antenna, and then most of the antennas that we put up are kind of these long range antennas that aren't really that great at localizing how close they are to the tower, but they have really long range. So it helps kind of create these fences and have be able to intercept birds. But for a place like Cedarburg Bog, where there is research being done in the area, maybe it would be a good site to kind of have a combination of the two, where you can track birds moving long distances with the long range antennas, and then these short range movements using kind of an omnidirectional antenna, which could open up a lot of different, especially with the research that's been done there with tree swallows and other birds out there. I can really imagine that being a really cool setup.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think Peter and Linda would be very interested in that.
Yeah.
When I was out at UC Davis, it was a different technology, but they basically the reserves at the UC system, they put out a bunch of towers like that and just were able to. It's a different kind of technology, but basically the same concept of being able to track organisms on like the UC system, and it just opened up a lot of different research questions, and I could see that it's just a really cool.
Let's see if we can set up a meeting with you and Dr. Meyer, Gretchen.
Yeah, definitely. I've met her, talked to her about other things, but yeah, this would be a great opportunity.
Super.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Marilyn?
Actually, a couple quick ones. Where is the tower location in Madison?
It's at Goose Pond, north of at their sanctuary.
Okay. And the other thing I was wondering about was how do these birds get tagged? Is it done by bird banders? And do they have, like, normally bird banders have to have a special project in order to do. So is that the way that this is happening then? There are a lot of bird banders who are.
So you need special training. So you need to have a bird banding license to kind of start out with, but you still need like additional training to, because they're essentially like little, to essentially attach the tags, you need additional training to do that. And that's actually been one of the downsides with COVID, is people who were supposed to be trained this year weren't able to be because, yeah, COVID. But so you kind of need those two levels of training. But what is interesting, so I helped organize the Midwest Migration Network's conference, I guess, was that just last week? Time is weird right now. And
Sure.
the head of the bird banding lab was talking about how pretty much any bander who wanted to band for programs like this essentially would be approved if they went through the full training. So you're right, a lot of times the bird banding lab requires that you have like these detailed, that you're working towards a question and trying to answer a research question. But there's a generalized recognition that these big projects just need a lot of people from different areas contributing, and that there's a recognition that you need to bring in people from different areas to do it well. And so it seems like they're pretty understanding of that, but you do need the training.
So the other question, the last question I had, I think you sort of answered it. Some of the Motus towers track birds from a distant, distant, and then other towers only catch the bird if it's like within 10 miles or something. Is that right?
So So the long distance towers have a range of 10 miles. The shorter distance ones, it really depends on what the area they're in is. I've heard things like a mile. So the omnidirectional antennas are really much better at figuring out how close they are to the tower, versus the long range ones pretty much just say that a bird was in range of it without any kind of location. You can kind of get a vague location because you know which antenna picked it up, but and they're pointed different directions, but you don't really know, oh, it was like 500 meters that way. You can't get that kind of information.
But would that be that important?
It really depends on your question. So
Yeah.
a lot of the big questions that we're like looking at continental level migration patterns, those probably doesn't, getting to that level of resolution is not important. But people have been kind of using a combination to look at different kinds of questions. So things like local movements of birds. So looking at breeding territories, or just kind of a lot of local movement questions for breeding, especially for breeding birds. It really just depends on what questions you're asking.
Okay, thank you.
One of the, I think this was a Motus study, Jennifer. There was one of those sessions in the MMN conference dealt with Kirtland warblers, and they were actually tracking birds in the individual pairs and stuff to see who was sneaking off on whom, basically, and figuring out which pairs were stable and in which the excess males were moving back and forth across the territory. I'm not sure I understood everything about the study, but it was fascinating to see the detail to which you could use some of this tracking. I don't know if Marilyn remembers, but for a while, Mark White at Schlitz Audubon was talking about putting up a couple of towers at Schlitz so they could basically track not just birds, but other critters, other small critters that you could theoretically tag and do a study like that there, just on the Schlitz property. So
I had a question for you, Jennifer.
Sure.
I'm a ham radio operator, and I'm used to doing a lot of VHF, UHF propagation work. And during this time of the year especially, we get a lot of inversions over Lake Michigan and all the Great Lakes, and including the East Coast and West Coast. Now, these antennas, I was very intrigued when you were explaining all of those. Is it possible, or have you ever gotten signals from birds, say way out over Lake Michigan or on the Michigan side of the lake through one of these sensors? I know some of these little micro transmitters can go a long way under inversion type conditions. So I was just wondering about that. That might throw your data off a little. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So that's the kind of tough thing of all of this, is that, especially with my understanding is, and I'm still learning more about this, so take this with a grain of salt, is that you pretty much just get data that the tag was in range, but you don't get a great sense of what the range was. So you don't know if something like that happened. You really can't tell. And this is something that people who do this for a living, like the companies that actually make these tags, are trying to work through kind of these issues, but I can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Very good presentation.
Thanks.
So it looks like Vicky's got a question, but you have to unmute yourself, Vicky.
Okay, unmute.
There you go.
Okay, I think I'm, in southeastern Wisconsin, we have a really great network of bird banders, very skilled people that are banding in a number of different locations. and I'm sure would be really excited to learn how to attach these tags. What is the cost of each tag?
About $200, give or take. What's kind of crazy right now is that, well, there are two different companies, and then there's a bunch of different options. So they're now making solar powered tags that have a much longer lifespan, that are a hair more expensive from my understanding. I've not bought any of these tags, but the prices are coming, what I've been told is the prices are coming down significantly, but it's in that kind of 200-ish price range. But it seems like every time I'm on one of these calls with the guys who actually developed the tags, that they're saying some new thing is coming out that drives down the price a little bit. So we'll see where it turns out, but that's where it's at the moment.
And then at the MMN meetings, they said that if you want to tag a bird, you have to be banding it at the location of a tower. Is that correct?
No, like, okay.
No.
So what I think Stu was trying to say is that what they're trying to encourage is that people tag birds near towers so that you are able to get some data from them, especially in areas that have relatively few towers. So say in Wisconsin, there's every chance in the world that if you tagged a bird farther south, like say now, a bird that's starting to migrate, you tagged it south of here, it may never get intercepted by anything. But if you tagged it near a tower, you at least get data about how long it stayed at that site and when it initiated migration. And that's why folks at Bird Studies Canada are really trying to advocate for people to band at the same place that a tower is. So at least you're ensuring you get some data. And that's especially important in areas that don't have like the really dense coverage that you have out east. Out east, there's a good chance you're going to intercept, especially if you're in, say, Pennsylvania or Ontario. Versus around here, it's a lot of money to put on a bird and not be sure it's ever going to get intercepted by a tower.
Okay, good, thank you.
I think we've talked about this at the observatory and priorities and all. I mean, we're sort of in the which is the cart and which is the horse sort of situation here. If we build more towers, more researchers will be inclined to tag birds. If there were more birds being tagged, we need to get more towers up. I mean, it's sort of you know we know that if we get more towers up, researchers will be inclined to want to use that capability to track things. Things like the golden wing warbler project that many of you have been involved in or even been supportive of financially. You know, we get a few more towers up. Amber Roth, who works with MMN and is out at the University of Maine, she'll be back in northern Wisconsin in a minute to start tagging birds so we can find out you know, where they go and when they depart and all that sort of thing. So it's a challenge for us. You know, those of you thinking about good projects to support, this is a good one. If anybody you know, had some money they wanted to commit to a tower, we'd work with you to find a location to erect your tower at. So.
Well, speaking of building towers, when the line of towers on the map you had of Wisconsin, you had the line along the Mississippi and along Lake Michigan, then you had that straight line east to west, but it was north of the state line. Where was that line across, and how did you decide that's where you wanted? I mean, it's such a perfect line.
Okay, that is slightly idealized to show, especially because
really what we were trying to do is really just seal off to create a line. For us, it's not that important where exactly it is, and that is kind of a consequence of where a couple of people have wanted to put up towers, and that's kind of where that horizontal line worked out because of Madison and Milwaukee, so Madison Audubon and Milwaukee County Zoo. It's approximately through that area because there are a couple of towers there now. That's really the logic. It's not there's something magical about just north of the state line. It's more about making sure that a bird that flies through this area would be intercepted if it was going north-south. We just want to make sure that there's a line somewhere so that bird will be intercepted.
Right. Okay, got it.
Right now, the observatory forms that sort of the corner of those two lines. Where the sort of, what would that be, the southeast anchor corner of that line, and there's another tower over on the Mississippi River at Eagle Valley that represents the southwest corner of that line. And then so far you have the zoo and Madison Audubon. Well, the zoo, Camp Whitcomb Mason, Madison Audubon, Goose Pond as the other connecting lines on that. And because these towers have a range, you know, River Edge could be part of that line. The bog could be part of that line. And if we had, you know, a little denser coverage along the southeastern corner of that line, well, that'd be a great start, particularly if those towers were teamed up with institutions that would get a lot of mileage out of the opportunity to host a tower.
And I guess I just want to highlight, while we're aiming for kind of these lines to make sure that they intercept birds, if you look out east, there aren't perfect lines. So if there are good fits for institutional or for fundraising reasons or for a lot of other reasons, if you think that there are more good fits out there that aren't perfectly on lines, please talk to me. It's not that this is kind of idealized because we have to start somewhere, and somewhere that makes sense. But it doesn't mean that there aren't other things that make sense. So just reach out, and we're happy to talk about it.
Jennifer, thank you very much. I really appreciate this. This is a great program tonight. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. It was fun talking to you, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions, thoughts, connections that you think I should make. It's been really great talking to different people, and you guys for sure know things I don't, especially being new to the area. So feel free to connect me with whoever you think I should be connected to, and I would appreciate that. So thanks,
okay,
guys.
Thank you and good night. Now we're going to go ahead and we won't have a chance for refreshments, although I saw Casey holding up something that looked like refreshments at one point. So
and Jim too.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad somebody's prepared. If everybody else would like to unmute yourself, we can do the bird checklist. I don't have a good. Good night, Jennifer.
Bye.
You can stick around and shout out birds too. If you unmute, it'll make it easier for you to do it, and I can keep track of the list without watching who's waving or what too. And I'm going to go through the list. This is sort of probably the fallowest month of the year in terms of the checklist, and we're a rather small but hearty band tonight as well. So I'm going to go off groups of birds and hope that people will shout out individual species within that.
Hi, Jackie.
Groups. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
I came
Turn the
online.
camera on.
And I will share the screen with the bird pictures. So
Yeah. Hey, Jerry Mead.
Yeah.
You seem to be lurking there, but your camera is pointed up at your ceiling fan. So we haven't had a chance to see you all night if you wanted to wave.
Here you are.
Okay, good. So, okay, so for this is the month of July, basically. Birds seen in Ozaukee and Washington counties, the southern edge of Sheboygan County and the northern edge of Milwaukee County down to about Capitol Drive. So geese, I'm pretty sure we've got Canada. Any other geese? Any swans at all? So ducks, wood duck? No wood ducks? Blue-winged teal, shoveler. Mallard, I can pretty well guarantee.
Yep.
Yep.
What other ducks? Okay. Pheasant?
Yes.
Okay. Any grouse? Turkeys, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Woo.
Any grebes? Rock pigeon, yes. Any collared doves? Mourning dove, yes.
Yes.
What about cuckoos? Any cuckoos? Any nighthawks?
Nope.
Boy, that's a shame. Chimney swift, yes. Ruby-throated hummingbird, yes. Any rails?
Yes.
Yes.
Who had Sora or Virginia?
Yep.
Any coots? Sandhill crane, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Any whooping cranes wander over this way? 21 pairs nested in the state this year. Last I read, there were still 14 young whooping cranes in the state. Blackneck stilts reported in a number of locations. Any in our area?
Wrong screen.
Avocet. What about plovers? Anything other than killdeer? Sandpipers, I can account for solitary and spotted. Anything else? Any yellowlegs? Danny, have you been out to that KK pond at all?
I haven't been anywhere.
Yeah, that's my problem too. Let's see, gulls. Ring-billed and herring, yes.
Yes.
Carolyn, any other
Yes.
gulls?
Yes.
Pardon?
No, not north of Capitol Drive, no.
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear both ring-billed and herring from here. And Caspian tern, yes. Any loons? Cormorant, yes. Any
Yes.
any bitterns? What about herons? Great
Yes.
blue?
Blue. Yes. Blue heron. Green heron.
Okay. Any black crowned night herons?
Only south of Capitol
great
Drive at the
egrets?
Juneau Lagoon.
Yeah, yeah. I was turkey vulture, yes. What about hawks?
Cooper's hawk.
Coopers?
Yeah.
And red-tailed. Any
Yeah.
bald eagles?
Yes.
North-
Yes, yes.
There's a pair hanging around the bog. Looks like
Oh, yeah, yeah. Red-shouldered, I know, on Scott Deal's property. You still got the broadwings, Mary?
Yes, we do. Down near the west parking lot.
Yeah. So what owls? Any screech owls?
Yes.
Bard,
Great horn, yes.
Yes.
I heard Bard mentioned.
Yes.
Any other owls? Kingfisher?
Yes.
Okay. Any red-headed woodpeckers?
Yes.
Woo.
Oh, good. I can account for red-bellied,
Yes.
brownie, hairy, and flicker.
Yes.
Look. Pileated.
Good,
Pileated.
pileated. Okay, pileated, good.
Got a pair
sap-
hanging around here.
Any sapsuckers?
Yes.
Good. Kestrel, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody have a merlin? Good. I had one down here. Chuck Hagner and I both have seen one in Shorewood. Anybody been to Port Washington for the peregrine?
No.
Well, I know it's there. I've seen it on camera. Flycatchers, great crested, eastern kingbird.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Any olive-sided back yet? Peewee, yes.
Yes.
How about Acadian? Alder? Willow? How about least flycatcher?
Yes.
No.
And Phoebe? Oh, somebody's got to have a Phoebe.
Yeah, we've got them at River Edge.
Okay.
Eve till someone has a Phoebe.
Shrikes. How about vireos? Which vireos? I've got red-eyed in my woods.
Mhm.
Red-eyed and warbling.
Okay. Any yellow-throated? Blue jays and crows for sure.
Yes.
How about horned lark? Well, we know we got purple martins at the observatory. Tree swallow, yes. Rough wings,
Yes.
Yeah.
bank.
There were over
Cliff?
200. There were over 200 swallows in Lake Doctors Park this morning. The only thing we didn't have was purple martin and a cliff swallow. So we had barn, tree, bank, and ruffling.
Wow,
Eight.
wow. Chickadees, yes.
Yes.
Any titmice?
That I've seen.
I think Joan just had one in her yard.
Okay, good. I have both nuthatches in my yard still.
Yes, I too.
Yeah.
Yes.
House wrens, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Mine are gone.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Wow.
Well, mine are still noisy as hell.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting point. We're to that point in August where things are starting to pull out already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sedge wrens, marsh wren. How about gnatcatchers? Anybody still getting gnatcatchers? Any kinglets around? I heard somebody mention bluebirds earlier. And
Yeah.
I saw a report on the veeries in the bog. What about wood thrush?
Norma had 2 Swainsons this week in her yard.
Really?
So there's a migrant.
Yeah. Robins around.
Yeah.
The wood thrush that I had right into June sort of either shut up or went away. Great. I've still got catbirds around. Anybody got a thresher? Starlings, yes. Cedar waxwings seem to be quite prevalent. I get them more times than not when I'm out and around. House sparrow, yes. Any pipits? House finches. Anybody got a purple finch?
Norma might have had one today, but she didn't put it down for sure. She just heard it. But they've been reported in Sheboygan and around, so
Yeah,
it's definitely time for them to be here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And which direction are they coming from, Marilyn?
Good question.
Yeah, I've noticed they popping up on the rare bird reports.
Yeah, they are.
American goldfinches, I've never had a bigger year for them. They seem to be everywhere. So any towies around? Okay, what about sparrows? Chipping, yes. Clay colored? Field? Vesper? Savannah, I can do a Savannah. Henslows? Song, I've had song.
Yeah.
Any other of those sparrows? Lincolns? What about what? I'm sorry. What?
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah. Eastern meadowlark. Nobody's been out in the fields. Bobolink.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. Eastern
Okay.
meadowlark too.
Say what?
Eastern meadowlark as well.
No, I didn't see those, but I said a neighbor of mine's got at least a dozen bobolinks in a
Oh wow.
bobolink heaven.
I've heard Baltimore Orioles mentioned tonight. Any orchard
Yes.
Yeah.
Orioles? Okay.
Grosbeak.
Yes. Okay. Rose-breasted grosbeak. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Scarlet tanager.
Okay.
Yeah.
Scarlet tanager.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Cardinal. Yes.
Yeah.
Indigo bunting. Dick Sissel. Blue grosbeak. The blue grosbeak is still up there at
Spirit
Spirit
Lake.
Lake.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, now I'm not going to read the whole warbler list, but I heard yellow warbler mentioned earlier, and I've had common yellowthroat. What other warblers? Marilyn, what about you? Any other warblers?
Not here. Oh, actually, I had a chestnut-sided warbler at Linden Gardens last week.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's not a bad list. Not a bad list at all. Anything else anybody wants to bring up before I mention next month? I talked to Sumner Madison the other day. He's going to be our presenter. And I'm trying to remember now. I was talking to him about we're going to do a test of his program. He wants to get together, Mary, and do a trial run to make sure he can do his program online.
Sure.
And I was going to say he's going to do Trumpeter Swan, the reintroduction program of the Trumpeter Swan.
Right.
And that should be
September 1st.
yeah, September 1st. We'll send out another warning email with details and everything like that. Thank you once again to Danny for getting out the MailChimp with all the details and stuff. I hope people got a chance to see our correspondence with a number of the organizations that we've donated money to.
Yeah.
I got nice notes from Danny and from Jessica and from Mary and Natalie at River Edge. Our $1,000 early donation was much appreciated. And I wanted to just give you a heads up. We're talking, I'm trying to work with other bird clubs to collectively agree to sponsor the last species recorded for the second Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas. Late in the 5th year, we confirmed glossy ibis breeding at Horicon Marsh.
Wow.
And we have, the Atlas Steering Committee has named the glossy ibis one of the charismatic species that we're seeking $10,000 sponsorship for.
Wow.
And we sponsored 3 other species that way. And we're seeking $10,000 in sponsorships to help fund the remaining work on the atlas, to fund the map making and some of the other the data compiling and stuff for the atlas that is already going on. And so I've already found 2 other bird clubs at the Ben Goss Bird Club in Waukesha County and the Green Lake Bird Club that are going to be willing to be co-sponsors. And I'm going to try and line up enough other bird clubs around the state that collectively over 2 years we can come up with $10,000. So some of the money that we've collected from the last Birdathon, Bandathon could go toward that. So just a heads up on the good things you're doing with the money that the Birdathon, Bandathon raises. So look forward to seeing you all again on September 1st. Sorry we don't have any treats to share, but I hope that people took care of themselves well enough. And
Yeah.
The one good thing about this is that you might even have an adult beverage to bring to bird club.
That's right.
Oh,
Peter.
Oh,
so how many dogs did we have on the call tonight? At least
Saw a cat, Danny's cat.
I know, I've had both my cats on here.
2 cats and 2
So
dogs
funny.
at least. So
And my dog was here, Jack.
That's cute.
my wife reminded me today that it's been 8 years ago today since our last pet left this mortal coil, and I was amazed that it had been 8 years that we had been dogless.
Wow.
And then, but
That's a long time.
that's a long time. But then last week we had sole possession of my son's Tennessee coonhound, Lucy,
Oh boy.
for a week
Oh boy.
while they were in Ohio. And I will tell you, the reason that we haven't got a new dog is that
Oh,
at least 1 or 2 weeks a year we get this Tennessee coonhound, and it inoculates us against having a dog.
I'd imagine.
Anyway, on that personal note, with my voice failing, I will bid you all a good night and thank you for joining us tonight.
I wanted to remind everybody about there's a Horicon field trip. You want to remind them?
Thank you. I have a note here to remind me, and I forgot it. August 23rd. In the MailChimp message, there were details for a socially, what did we say? Physically distanced but socially engaged field trip to Horicon Marsh.
Horicon Marsh, yep.
There's a new meetup spot in the little parking lot restroom area at the northeast corner of the marsh, there along Highway 49. 7 a.m. August 23rd. We will keep distanced and try and stay healthy, and we'll have a good time for those of you who want to join us. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.
See you next month.
Yep. Take care.
Bye. Bye.